Hi, everyone. Welcome to All the Forbidden Things. This is the show where we talk about things that we're not talking about, even with close loved ones and friends, or we talk about them in ways that we're not usually talking about them. So today I am joined by my badass, dearest friend, Nicole Netti. I'm so glad to be able to call you by that last name
Yes,
now
me
because
too.
she is finally divorced from someone that we don't like at all. Um, and we've known each other since 2021, so going on like 5 years now, I think. And we met the first night we met. You told me that you were going through a divorce, and I was like, "I'm buying you a drink." And I think you mentioned some things about how your marriage had been and how bad it was, and we can get into that a little bit as you want to. But I had come from a really bad relationship just very shortly before that. And so we kind of have helped each other gain back our power, learn to use our voice more. We cheer each other on. We've done a lot of dating adventures that we've had to go through along side by side. There's been eras of dating for us. And just like learning how do we I would say specifically, how do we relate to men as well as our own power, and how do we relate to that combination of things? So, welcome to the
My gosh, thank you
show.
for having me. I'm so excited here.
Today we're going to talk about that dynamic specifically, like how women are taught to relate to their own power, how women are taught that power exists between men and women, and how that has become toxic and dangerous in our own lives. And then I also have strong feelings about like when we try to go too far in the other direction and where we want to land, and at the same time, like there is still a lot of real tangible problems that are all over the news about how men treat women and what is going on out there. And I think we still, despite the changes that we've had in our freedoms and our abilities, there's still a lot of judgment of women who are trying to kind of be in their power. There are toxic ways that we can do it, but also even just like in very natural, human, appropriate ways, it can really destroy your dating life. It can really mess with a lot of things if you are trying to speak out. So, the format of our show is usually that we ask each other questions. I will kind of lead the charge on that with us guessing for each other. But we first start out with a fun question. So, what do you think is my favorite color? I don't know if you know that.
Oh, I don't actually know that, I don't think. I feel like green.
I knew that this was gonna that it was gonna throw you for a loop. No, I think my favorite color through most of my childhood was always blue, and it has turned into red over the last
Oh yeah, I
several
didn't
years.
know that.
So
Oh my god, that's cute.
yeah, I would say like my very favorite color aesthetically is like a burgundy red, like a
Okay.
dark kind of.
I feel like I
Yeah,
should have known
yeah.
that.
I mean, but see, I'm gonna guess yours now, and I'm gonna guess what you're wearing as well. I'm gonna be like bright
Yeah,
red.
it's not. So my favorite
Also
it's
pink.
pink. It's
You like
pink.
pink.
Yeah. So pink is my favorite color, but in terms of like wearing, like what color I like to wear, I like blue because I feel like blue really brings out my eyes, but my favorite color is definitely pink. Yeah,
Mm.
all things
Mm.
pink.
All right. Well, that is actually a good starting point for what we both learned about like what a woman is, gendered like stereotypes that we grew up with. So what I'm going to take a guess first at what you learned as a child a woman should be. Um, you grew up in a less religious, I think, environment than I did, or in a slightly different way. So I doubt that there was a a godliness factor in like what a godly woman is, except that you also grew up in the Midwest. So there is that. But I feel like you've always had to be strong in your life and through life events that you've gone through. And so I don't know if you had the luxury of like being like taught like how to be this like very delicate blah 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 like dependent woman. Um and so and I feel like you probably saw some strong women in your life that you admired. So this is like such wild guesses, but I do think that you were taught what all millennial women are taught, which is at the end of the day, the guy in a relationship or in life, men want to feel like the badass. They are the ones that are supposed to be in charge. They set the tone. They make the final decisions in the home. They are like, and that you have to make sure that they always feel that way. So that's my guess.
Yeah, so that's pretty spot on, I would say. I think like my earliest memory of that is it's funny that we always try to say we're not like our parents, but I remember very specifically like my mom, because my dad was also abusive, like it was like she couldn't speak up about things. And I think through just like seeing her not speak up about things, even though maybe it wasn't said to me, like, you don't have a voice or you can't say anything. It was just passed on to me through her own actions and her own being afraid to like kind of speak up, for what she believed in. And so I think for a long time, it was just kind of ingrained in me that like safety and having a voice, like they can't go hand in hand. So if you want to keep yourself safe, you just stay quiet and you don't say anything and you don't stick up for, injustices that you see, you just kind of let it go. And so for me, it was more taught like, just kind of keep your head down and be quiet and do what needs to be done. And that way you keep yourself safe or you keep your job or, and my grandma, who also had a big impact in raising me, she grew up in a very different time period and she was in a male dominated field working for the railroad. And she was one of the only women. And she to this day will tell me stories about how she would be sexually harassed and she couldn't say anything because she had a child to care for and she had to keep her job. And she was like, Nicole, if I would have said anything, I would have lost my job and then I wouldn't have had a way to care for my family and my child. So that stuck with her, her entire life. And even as society kind of started to change and women started to have a voice and feel like they could have a voice, I feel like she kind of still was like, Nicole, I just don't think you should say anything. I think you should just keep your head down and do your job and let it go. And I just have never been a person that can let things go. So, and I don't think that she necessarily, again, I don't think she meant to like silence me in any way, but I think that for her, it was like, okay, well, I don't want you to speak up about something and lose your job and not have a job, or I don't want you to speak up about something and get in trouble at school, or, whatever the case may be. And again, she was taught, if you speak up, there's a target put on your back. So if you speak up, Nicole, there's going to be a target put on your back in whatever capacity that might be.
I feel like that's something that I hear similar type of like messaging in families and protection for certain minorities, right? Where there's genuine safety risks that exist in the world based on what you look like or how you're born. And there are current day implications that are still real. And then there's also the generational messaging that passed down sometimes ages out. So it's like there are some aspects that are still very real, and there are some aspects that are what it was like for the generation before you, but you get the whole package of the messaging. So that's interesting. I didn't grow up with like a safety concern issue in terms of men or women, but I did experience it in a personal sense. I'll let you take a guess at what I grew up believing about women and power and how much you should have and how you should behave.
Well, I know you grew up in the church, so I'm assuming that probably had some impact on it. And having like gone to a church most of my life, that really does play a big part in how you feel about speaking up about things. And I think a lot of churches teach that men are the leaders and men get the final say so. And, you're supposed to be a Proverbs 31 woman and you're just supposed to be a good wife and a good mother and you don't really have a say. And so I would assume, like, having grown up in the church, you kind of got that as well of like, not necessarily that we can't speak up, more so just like we're supposed to find a man to speak up on our behalf.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say what what I learned in terms of the relationship between men and women and decision making, and yes, being vocal and being the leader is definitely what is found in parts of the Bible. And I don't fault it. And I even had a conversation with my dad recently about a certain passage that's like challenging for them in the church to figure out, like, well, it says this, but like we don't want women not to participate. And like, how does that translate into a modern world or how we understand things now? But I definitely grew up, and it's not just like my parents, it was the messaging of, I went to a Christian school as well as the church I was in. I was like an avid reader of the Bible, and so I definitely learned this like Ruth type character. There was my favorite character in the Bible was Esther. And and she actually did speak up, but I remember that there was all this machinations, like she had to like set up these banquets and like somehow like lure her man into listening to her, and that felt very natural and appropriate. Like, oh, of course she would have to be cunning about it. And that was badass that she was, I won't say manipulative. I still will honor that as a cool story. But, and I don't like when women are called manipulative, because a lot of the times it's just that we don't have other ways of getting to the top than to come around things in a more subtle or underhanded fashion. But anyway, I definitely learned a couple things, because I also learned at home. I have this British grandmother who is very like, this is how, you are being proper and things like that, right? And children are seen and not heard. And so there was a lot of quietness. And then I also think that my personality is a bit, I think I scare people sometimes, and maybe rightly so. But that was always upsetting for me as a child, that I would potentially be too much for people that I loved, or that. So it was like, as a person, I had concerns, but I also very much learned that, like, yeah, women are the helpmeet to men. So it wouldn't make sense that you would think of yourself in a place of leadership or power.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm interested, like, what are some struggles that you still carry? Because we have like internalized sexism, and we have internalized messaging. And like, the more that I feel like I've become empowered, if you will, the more that I also realize there are these pesky things that just like have a hard time getting away from. I guess I'll just ask you outright, like, do you have any like leftover beliefs that pop up where you're like, I'm not allowed to do this, or I can't, where you're not unhindered in expressing yourself?
I think the biggest thing that I've been like, not really struggling with lately, but just like the narrative of women being too emotional drives me freaking insane, because For one, I'm like, men will never know all the hormones that we have, like they will never know, like they will never understand. But I hate that, I hate that narrative of women are too emotional. Women can't lead because they're too emotional. Like, and I struggle with that even now, I guess, expressing emotions, because I feel like I'm being too much if I express, like, and I will often say, like, I know this is so dramatic, and then like have a friend reinforce, like, that wasn't dramatic at all. But it just like, that's kind of what we're taught. And so to have like any sort of like, it almost feels like you have to be a robot. Like, and I'm not a robot. I'm a very emotional being. I'm a very highly sensitive person. So sometimes it feels like, you know, like, I mean, I remember even having like, not, I don't want to say an outburst, but like I started like getting emotional at work and crying, because I'm one of those people that when I get really angry or really upset, like I just start crying, and I wish I could hold it in, but it's just my reaction. And my boss was like, this isn't something to cry over. And I'm like, but you don't understand how I'm feeling right now. And like crying is my out. Like it's like what gives me the release. And, and men have that too, because I've seen grown men break TVs over their football team not winning a football game. And I have never in my life broken a TV. And so I'm like, how can you say we're too emotional, when I've seen grown men act stupid over things that like I don't really think matter. But again, who am I to say, what matters to me might not matter to you, and vice versa. And so, but I think that's my biggest thing, is like feeling like, you know, we're just being too emotional, or, when we see some sort of injustice, like we're having too big of an outburst, and it's just too much the way that we're speaking out about it. But nobody says that about men. And it's like, and I often feel that men could say the same exact thing that I say in the same exact tone of voice that I'm saying it in, and it would be okay for them to say it. But because I've said it, it's, you're being too much, you're being too dramatic, you're having too many emotions. And I don't really think that's fair. I think that, grown men also have big reactions and temper tantrums. And I mean, we see it on the news every single day. Like, the same thing is happening with men. So why is it that with women, it's labeled as us being too emotional or too much? I hate that.
It's so interesting because I think probably emotionality gets a bad rap across the board, because I feel like a lot of men are emotionally stunted through the way that they're raised. It is appropriate for men to feel anger, and it is appropriate for women to feel sadness. But when you try to mix the two, it gets weird. But then secondly, while it is appropriate for women to feel sadness, it still keeps you in a category of a lower status. So being like sad or emotional or having a lot of compassion or empathy, I feel like often is something that is considered the inverse of being powerful. And I think that's a false perception that we have in general, which is this sort of idea that because I think if you are in touch with your emotions and you are passionate and you are moved by things, then you're getting in touch with your power, right? Because your power is then the presence and the dominance that allows you to move forward on it. But if you're just exercising like decision making in an emotionless way, it's not very informed or embodied. So, but it is frustrating because as women, we're not really allowed to get angry because it's ugly. And we're not really allowed to get sad in the sense that while it's sort of deemed appropriate, it makes us look even weaker. And that's really frustrating. It's frustrating that women are relegated this realm of emotionality, and then kind of there's a disgust towards it at the same time.
Yeah. And I mean, I will also say, I was just thinking about this, and I'm like, no, Nicole, you are a little biased, because I seeing a grown man cry like gives me the ick. I'm not gonna lie to you. And I like, it's so sad for me to say that, because I'm saying like everyone should be able to have their emotions and be who they are. But again, I never in my entire life saw my dad cry but one time. And it was when our dog was poisoned and died. And it wasn't even a full on cry. I remember walking into the kitchen and just seeing a couple teardrops, and I knew something was wrong because I've like never seen a grown man cry at this point in my life. And so I saw a few tears and that was it. And my grandpa too. Like I never saw him like have big, he was just a manly man, and he had the most intense work ethic you could ever imagine. And he worked hard, and he didn't he didn't speak often until after he was retired. So I was almost like, I don't want to say a little afraid of him, but more so intimidated because I didn't see any emotions ever. And so when I did, it was like, oh my God, something must be really wrong because, now I'm seeing like these emotions. But I have to sometimes remind myself, like in the same way that I sometimes tear up at a wedding or a TV show, like for a man to have that reaction is also very normal. It just doesn't feel normal to me. And so my first instinct is like, ooh, why is a grown man crying? And then I have to remind myself, like, they're allowed to have emotions too. And like, that's like that's properly displaying your emotions by my own very logic, but it just doesn't feel right because it's not what society has taught us.
Yeah, it's like it gets really bifurcated. And if you are experiencing an emotion or a way of being that's on the opposite of what you were taught to be, it's like almost uncanny valley. You're like, oh my God, I don't know what to do with that. That feels really weird. And yeah, it's true. It is hard. I think that, well, this is another interesting question, is like, do you feel like did you grow up thinking that men should be stronger than women or more powerful than women? And do you still feel that way? And in what ways?
In some ways, and it maybe like sounds sexist. I mean, I do really believe that if you like that a man should be the leader of a family, and not in terms of like not letting a woman have a say or not speaking up, but I do think that men are supposed to be providers, and there's things, like a man is supposed to keep a woman safe and make her feel safe just because men are stronger than women, biologically. And, so there are some beliefs that I have, if you were to get married and have a family, like, what does that look like versus, if you're not taking that route and you're just like a single woman. And so there are some beliefs that I have, but I think overall, in terms of like what I was taught, was that, women aren't really to be in power. We're too emotional to be in power. Where, we shouldn't speak up about things because that's not really our place. And I think that all honestly changed for me when I really thought that we were going to have a female president. I think I really started seeing like, okay, now America's not ready for a female president, and we obviously saw that, but I saw more women start speaking up and using their platforms because of, honestly, politics and how like, dividing they are, and seeing like you kind of have to pick a side. I started seeing like, no, like women are just as powerful as men, and like when we speak up, people listen. And I would almost say sometimes more so because we're vulnerable and we show emotion. And so I think sometimes, that plays into it as well. But I think now I believe we should have just as much of a say as men do. Like there's no reason, the women and men are very different, but we're different in areas where like we need to be different. And so I think that there almost needs to be a balance between the voice of a man and a woman, because I'm not going to lie, there's some times when I'm, thinking pretty irrationally. And sometimes, as much as I hate to admit it, I can talk to one of my brothers and they can be like, hey, like, let's look at both sides of things. And they're coming at it from no emotion at all. Like, this is just facts. And women tend to come at things with emotion, and we tend to, I know I do, like I wear my heart on my sleeve. So I start thinking of things like, instead of thinking of this as like rationally, what are the facts? What am I looking at? I start thinking about how I feel about it. And sometimes how you feel about something and like what the facts say don't necessarily align. So I think that's where, I think women and men can balance each other out really well. But I don't think that men should have any more of a say so or any more of a voice than women should.
Yeah. It's really hard because I think in a relationship these days, one probably has to really discuss what it means for both let's say a traditionally raised man and a woman, traditionally raised woman, to feel like there is equality, or does there need to be equality, or in what areas? And is it that your opinions should be equal, or is it that who reacts to the threats should be equal? Or like, because I do hear a lot of women say that they long for leadership from men in relationships, and that would align very much with the way that I was taught to be as a kid, right? So like if you want somebody to lead, you have to be the follower. And but what's hard is that it's not as cut and dried as like they're always the leader and you're always the follower, because sometimes it's like, yeah, but I have an opinion, or I want to say where things go. So I think it can be very challenging for men to know where they sit in that, the more that we have opinions, because it's like they pop up all over the place and are kind of unpredictable. Like it's kind of unpredictable when I want to lead a situation versus when I don't. And I think that these days it really has to be a very distinct conversation in each relationship of like who's gonna lead what ways and what those expectations are. I think it's interesting. I don't believe that. So as far as it concerns me on that question, I with Kamala, I felt like she was extremely empowering, because for similar reasons, there was still a part of me that was like, oh my God, but if a woman's leading, then it feels like no one's at the wheel. Like I sort of had this perception, even though I don't identify that way. And I'm like, oh, I could lead the charge. Like, I play the game on the subway, like who's going to be with me when we take down the person who's trying to take over the train? Like, I just assume myself in that role. But then when I think about it in general with other people, I'm like, oh my God, what do we do with our hands? Like, we're not really safe if there's no man in charge. Like, that's the emotional experience under the surface. And I think that she really proved to me through her presence and through her way that she's like a warrior, that she's a person that like, no, we would be fine. Like, I want that person in charge instead. And I think that she gave us something so life changing in that way. She really altered the landscape, at least for many of us internally, that I think one should never forget. It wasn't just a loss. Like, she brought a whole new way of seeing things. And I think that when women do embody their power in a way that is not taking other men down to do it, or like that is not warlike or not like whatever, but they're just like living their truth and they're just going forward, there is this thing where all of your beliefs about what women can or cannot do kind of fades away. And so it's really like when we still maintain that belief about ourselves, we're signaling to other people, oh, she's a little insecure that she's not going to be able to hold down the fort. So I certainly don't believe in her, and then when somebody comes along and they don't have that belief, you're just like, oh, I want to follow you. So, and I think, whatever her flaws were, I think that one could agree they were more a question of people not agreeing with policy, or her taking different stances on things, or maybe changing stances on things or whatever. But I think of all the things so far, it was least about her being a woman that was going on. I mean, I think that it is and it isn't, right? For a lot of people, it still is, I'm sure. But anyway, but yeah, I really, it was really harsh for me to recognize that I had that fear come up at times where I'm like, I don't feel safe if a man is not in charge. But there's something real to be said about the physicality aspect. And that's where I think it like goes into like own your realm. Like if you are bigger and stronger than the other person in the relationship, you should be the one that gets out of bed in the middle of the night to go fight the person. So if you're like some bodybuilder woman and your dude's this skinny little guy, then you get to be that person. But most of the time, it's a dude who tends to be larger. And I also think that it's scary because we walk around the world always knowing, always measuring, always sizing up how large the men are, how interested they seem. Every person around us, it's unconscious at this point, but I always know who everyone is in the room and what level of threat they may present. And so it's not comforting to think that there aren't other people who are just as large as those people who would be out for my benefit and take care of me, because I know that I can't hold down the fort. They would overpower me. So anyway, that's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think like, I mean, even as women, like we can't go running at night. You know what I mean? You can't go running at night, even in a safe neighborhood with headphones in. Like I would never, if I'm even on a walk and it's starting to get dark, I would never be walking with my headphones in because I have to be hearing what's going on around me. And if someone, comes up behind me, I have to know that. And I don't think men have to think about that. Like I think that they're just like, oh, I'm going to go for a jog in the middle of the night. Like I'm fine. But women were just constantly thinking about, just like you said, like someone can smile at you the wrong way and you're like, oh my God, is this person going to follow me home? Like you start becoming paranoid and you're just like looking around. And, I've driven home before and felt like somebody was following me for way too long. And I'm like, okay, I'm just going to drive past my house and like, see if this person, just out of paranoia of like being a woman in America, And so, yeah, there definitely is like that physical aspect of it because I don't think that men necessarily have to think about those things.
And I think that things like gentlemanly behavior, which is something that's less important to me in a relationship, and yet when someone does it, I'm like, oh my God. So I'm definitely not above it. But I think like that sense that a guy is planning something or taking the lead or whatever, the reason that that can be comforting, if that's something that you like as a woman, is because it's a type of virtue signaling, not in the bad sense, but a type of signaling of like, I am out for your good. I am a safe person. I see you as somebody who should be treated well. Like, this is what you can expect from me. I am not scary. I'm not going to hurt you. I think there's something that's there that's sort of like balancing out the fact that technically they do walk into the room with, in a primal sense, more power because they're larger and they're stronger. But it is challenging. I know a lot of like men get really frustrated by that. And women are kind of all over the map about it. So I can see how we would be hard to date because it's like, some people feel insulted if you try to pay the check, and some people feel like I'm never going to speak to you again if you don't try. And, how are they supposed to know? But I think one thing that I'd love to touch on is like we both have had really bad experiences with men. And from what I remember about you, you felt initially safe in the relationship that you were in, the relationship that became your marriage and one that you ultimately left. And that does something, but I just want to touch on like a very real instance of when one becomes overpowered and what that looks like and what that feels like. When would you say, you can talk a little, if you want to give a little context about what that relationship was like, but also when did you feel like you were this like powerful woman at the beginning that might have been attractive to him, and then like when do you feel like it started to slip away? What were the things that happened that made you feel that way, that you know kind of don't recognize yourself at the end?
Yeah, so my ex-husband and I dated for 2 years before we got married. And 2 years is a pretty significant amount of time. I would say that in 2 years you think that you know someone pretty well. Maybe not everything about them, but you know who they are, who they are at their core. And so for 2 years, like, he did all the gentlemanly things and was like, I guess, the stereotypical like leader of the family and planned everything. And now I recognize those things as him wanting to have control over me, not so much like I want to plan our date nights and I want to, like, I want to order for you because I know what you like, or whatever it may be. Like, I realized he was doing all those things to have control over every aspect of my life. But at the time I saw it as like, this is just how a man's supposed to be. They're supposed to plan everything. And I'm just supposed to be the passenger princess. And, I'm just supposed to go with the flow. And so then I think that, and before we were married, definitely I felt like I had more of a voice and I was very opinionated. And, I thought that those were part of the reasons that he loved me and, things that he loved about me. And later those traits became a problem because, he wanted to just control me and tell me what to believe and tell me how I should be and what I should say and what I should do. And so I think in the first couple years, yeah, I definitely felt that safety and I felt, like I was in my feminine energy because, there was someone that was so masculine that I didn't have to be masculine anymore, and he was doing all the, like, my sister and I call them blue chores, which is like the boy chores of like taking the trash out. And like, there's just certain things that I'm like, you should be doing that as a man. You should take the trash to the dumpster because it's dark out and like you're stronger and bigger than me. And you're not going to get overpowered at the dumpster, whereas maybe I might. Like, there's just certain things, that I feel like you're like, yeah, this is a man being a man in a relationship. And then I definitely think, like, after we got married, it was just like a switch flipped. And I sort of felt like, he maybe felt like that piece of paper, that marriage certificate gave him like control and power over me, like ownership over me. Which is why, now I have totally different beliefs about marriage. And I just like, primarily I do feel like the reason people got married, like our grandparents, great grandparents, was because, women couldn't have bank accounts and they couldn't vote and they couldn't do all these things. And so it almost was like a certificate of ownership, really. And I hate to say that, but I do feel like that's how he looked at it, is like, now we're married. Now I can treat you however I want to treat you. And you can't really go anywhere. And I think I did believe that, I really did believe that. And so the first time that, I don't even remember what we were fighting about or what, it was probably something stupid, to be honest, but I was a little bit too opinionated. And I remember telling him like something along the lines of, you can't tell me what to do. Like, and, I'm going to do what I want to do. And he literally grabbed me by my neck and he had his hand around my neck so hard. And the way that he had me shoved up against the wall with his elbow and his hand around my neck, there was nowhere for me to go. And the more that I tried to get away, the more that he showed me that there was no getting away. The more, like, I remember we just like wrestled to the ground and he was like, you're not getting up. Like, you're not going anywhere. And it was almost like I had to just kind of submit to that and be like, okay, yeah, I get it. Like, you're big and you're strong and you could hurt me. Like, and if I say too much, this is what's going to happen. So I just have to keep my opinions to myself from now on. But on the flip side of that, my therapist, I had a therapist that told me this, and I still live by this to this day, is that you don't have to attend every fight you're invited to. And there's been so many times in my life that people, coworkers, be it, coworkers, a guy that I'm talking to, whatever, will try to pick a fight with me. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not interested. Like, I'm just not going to say anything. And, I have taught so many people that there's power in silence too. And I really do believe that, because I really believe that when someone is trying to get a rise out of you and they're just trying to get under your skin and they're trying to get some sort of reaction, if you can just remain silent, because it's so hard to remain, like, it's so hard to not say something. I'm like, I want to cuss you out right now, but I'm not going to. You being silent not only says a lot to the other person, but I think in a lot of situations it makes them more mad. And I'm not gonna lie, like, that's a reaction I love to get out of my ex-husband. Like, I love to sit in silence and him just be berating me and cussing at me and screaming at me, and me just not have any reaction. And I would just say, I don't have to attend every fight that I'm invited to, and so I'm not gonna attend this one. But then that made him more mad. And in that situation, that also resulted in him hurting me. So it was like, you can't be too opinionated because he's going to hurt you, but you also can't not argue back because he's going to get more mad that you're not engaging in this fight.
It's interesting because how would you say that maybe more evolved perspective of silence is a power move as well, it's its own statement, is different than the original perspective that you grew up with, that you can't speak up against men?
I think that with being silent, there's like a time and a place. Like, it's you have to know when something is worth engaging in and when something is really worth sticking up for, versus someone's just rage baiting me and trying to get an ugly reaction out of me to show the world, like, oh my God, look, she had this ugly reaction to this. She's not the person she says she is. She's actually a horrible person, And I think when you're really angry, we all say things that we don't mean. It's so easy to start name calling, and, like, even with my siblings, I'll just say petty things like, well, remember that time that you did this? And it's like, why did you even bring that up? It has nothing to do with anything, but so I think there's a difference between knowing, like, okay, no, I'm going to stand my ground and I'm going to speak up about this thing because it's really important, versus like, this person's just trying to rage bait me and really strong reaction out of me, and it's actually not worth my energy. So I'm just going to remain silent. And it's kind of a delicate balance. And I feel like there are times when I've kind of gotten rage baited on the internet and spoken up about things, and like, people that follow me or, are my friends on Facebook or whatever see that, and it's like a turn off for them, and they're like, ooh, I don't want to follow this person anymore. And so again, like, it's knowing when it's worth it, and when it's worth it, being able to stand by that no matter what, even when, like, I've made some TikToks that have gone viral that my grandma has said, like, I think you should take that down. And I start to think, like, no, I think you're right. Like, I'm losing followers because I spoke up about this thing. And then when I really sit with it, I'm like, no, that's actually how I feel. So if that's a turnoff to you, it just is what it is. But there's just so many people out there, and even in the world, like, even when you're just grocery shopping or driving, that will just, try to get you riled up about something. And you have to know when it's worth just, like, not letting it get to you, versus like, no, this is actually something I need to say, and you're going to listen.
Yeah, it's such an interesting, I think, like, in the journey of healing from a relationship where you were silenced, like, in my experience, God, I had someone pinning me to the ground, play wrestling, pushing me down, grabbing wrists, like, that feeling of, like, don't forget, I'm above, I'm in charge. And I walked out of that relationship thinking that I had not an intellectual thought in my head, that I was dumb, that I started to really believe those things about myself, because he would try to engage with me in ways that would sort of set me up for failure, or like were things I didn't know much about. And then it would be like a way that he would prove that he knew more than I did. And then it spirals, right? So, but I think in your journey of getting your voice back, if you will, there's the initial phase where you feel like you have to yell at everything. Like, oh my God, sharing my voice is putting it out there for anything, or engaging in any fight, or, just hating every man, or, it's like, this is what it means to get my power back. And I think people are often engaging in that, whether they're a part of a group that has been silenced or pushed down, and they're trying to kind of gain power back from that, or whether they've experienced it personally. But there's this immature phase where we feel like we have to yell at everything. And then you start to realize that having power over your voice is having mastery over it. So when I speak is my choice, and what I say is my choice, and how I treat it and what I think about it is mine. And so there are things that are just truly not worthy of me participating. And then there are times, and it's hard because with the online thing, it is really hard to know the difference sometimes between, I have something really important to say, and then balancing out, do I know enough about this topic? Is the most powerful way for me to be the one to say it, or should I get someone else in here to say it? Like, what is the point beyond me being myself? Like, what am I offering to people, or anybody, or even myself, by doing this? And so, and that really is a challenge. It's something that like takes a lot of maturity to navigate. And then we have the other added layer of, like, going back to sort of what women are allowed to do or not. There is still, you come out of an abusive relationship, you get your voice back, you learn how to use it in a balanced way. And then there's still men out there who are like, you can't say that, you can't feel that way. And it feels very gendered. Yep. Right. And you've said to me before that there's things that you've said that if you hear them from a man, no one picks a fight. But when a woman says them, it's just like, oh, you're being too emotional, or it's not your business. Or so, I mean, what have you experienced kind of on that front?
So most recently I had some work drama, with some issues, some situations that were going on at my workplace that I was very vocal about. And, leadership didn't like that I was vocal about it, and they didn't like that I was speaking up about it. And that I don't necessarily think, I don't know for sure. I can't say for sure that was because I was a woman. I think that even if it had been a man speaking up about those same issues, like those were issues they didn't want being brought to light. But then I think when I took to the internet about it and was like, okay, well, let's see what the internet has to say about these things. I had several friends and family members that reached out to me and were like, you have to take that video down. Like, you have to take it down. If the hospital sees that, they're going to fire you. Like, you have to take it down. And I was like, I remember specifically saying to my grandma, like, well, what did I say wrong in that video? Like, everything I said in the video was factual. And so what did I say wrong? And she was like, well, I just think that, speaking out about the hospital, like, they're not going to like that. And, they're probably going to fire you over it. And I specifically asked her, I said, well, if I were a man and I were a man that said those things, would you still be calling me to ask me to take the video down? And she was like, well, no, now that you mention it, no, I wouldn't. And I was like, okay, so why is it that, like, I speak out about these things in the same way that a man would, and everybody's calling me, telling me, like, you need to take these videos down. It's going to tarnish your reputation. You're going to lose your job. But I know for a fact, if a man had said those exact same things, nobody would be questioning it. And actually more people would probably have gotten behind that and been like, oh my gosh, like, this hospital is doing all these things wrong. We need to fix it. And so, but I think, like, raising that argument to my family and friends, I think that almost every single person I can remember said, like, no, actually, you're right. You should leave the video up. Like, if you feel that strongly about it, that you made the video, you should just leave it up. And, like, whatever the consequences are, the consequences are. And my grandma specifically, she called me like a week later and she was like, I think that a lot of what I tell you comes from the mindset of, I grew up in a different time period than you did. And, I was so scared of losing my job because it would have been so hard for me to find something else. And I had a child to raise. And she's like, but you always land on your feet. You've never been afraid to stand up for what's right, even if that means that you get fired or, you get told like you're being put on a PIP, or that's happened before. Whatever the thing is, I've never been afraid of it because I'm like, what are you going to do to me? Like, the worst that you can do to me, the worst has already been done in my marriage by someone who was supposed to love me. So you cannot hurt me by taking my job away. I will find another one. There's a million jobs out there. Like, I did feel very strongly about it. And I was like, I'm not taking the videos down. Like, I'm not taking them down. If there's consequences, like, there will be consequences and I'll deal with it then. But I remember my grandma saying, like, honestly, I'm so proud of you. Like, she was like, I am so proud of you because you speak up for people in a way that I never could have. And I never had the guts to. And she's like, and watching you specifically on TikTok, she's like, her and my sister are my number one fans on my videos. They like get a pop-up that says when I've posted a new video and they get so excited. And she's like, watching you like speak up for people that don't have a voice has like, it's been so empowering. And it's really shown me that like, that you can have a voice as a woman and not be afraid of the consequences. Like, and if there are consequences, so be it. If you don't like what I have to say about this hospital, maybe we should be taking a deeper look at what's actually going on at the hospital versus like being mad about a TikTok I made about it, So I think that in a lot of ways it showed my friends and family, like, if there is something that I am speaking up about on the internet, it's because I feel very passionately about it and I'm not going to back down. Like, whatever that thing may be, whatever fight that brings, I'm not backing down from it. And you don't have to worry about me. Like, I can have a voice and you don't need to worry about me. But in the same regard, I had people commenting on those videos and saying, hey, you need to make a video just saying I'm of sound mind, I'm not suicidal, like in case something happens to you. And I was like, what do you, like, I was like, what? And people were like, you have no idea how powerful people that work in these hospitals and these corporations are. Like, they could actually, physically come after you for speaking up about it. And these were both men and women that were saying these things. And so I think that even there's like this power dynamic of like, you're this big corporation that makes billions and trillions of dollars. And so maybe you could like hurt my reputation in a way that could be very damaging. But again, like, whatever fight you're going to bring to me, I'm not backing down from it.
It's interesting because you're such a powerful person, and I feel like even most men would probably be afraid of doing what you've done. And I think that it's interesting. There's a stereotype out there that people who are in abusive relationships are like weak people. And I think actually that these men, these abusers, pick on people. Like, the more powerful of a person you can undermine, the more powerful you are. And so I think that it is important that people realize none of us are immune to the types of games and messaging and manipulation and lies and ways of abusers. They're all different. So once you know one, doesn't mean that you're not going to get fooled by another. But has going through that experience made you mentioned, like, I've already had the worst happen to me. Like, has it made you even bolder and braver because you, like a phoenix, came out of something where like you were always a strong person and always opinionated, and now you're just like, this is mine now. Like, I own this.
Yeah. And I think sometimes to my detriment almost, because I think that sometimes, like, I can be a little bit intimidating and a little bit like, I just am not, I'm loud and I'm opinionated. And I think sometimes, as I've been dating, I'm like, I think sometimes that's intimidating to men, but I'm like, well, then that's just not the right person for me, because I do feel like going through all of that, like when you have literally been choked to the point of unconsciousness and have had, I mean, I had bruises, handprints around my neck. And, you know, several times before the last incident, before my divorce, I had called the police and they would come out, and honestly, several times they took his side because I had no physical markings on me. And so I remember like screaming at this police officer and being like, you guys won't arrest him. And they're like, well, it's your word against his. And like, I actually got kicked out of my own house at one point because I called the cops. When the cops got there, they met Brandon at the door. So his story was the first one they heard, and they made me leave and they called me the aggressor. And so that almost taught me, like, again, it just seems like you're taking a man's side over mine because there's no physical markings on me. But so the last time when I had those physical markings on me and Brandon obviously went to jail, that really, I feel like that really showed me that, that I could have a voice and that people were listening. It just maybe wasn't as easy as I had wanted it to be. But I do feel like in a lot of ways that has made me braver, and it has made me bolder. And I've had people say to me, like, we need more people like you, like, that aren't afraid to just stand up and say what it is, you know? I do think that comes from a place of like, I constantly go back to that and think like the worst has already happened to me. Like, and if I could survive that, like, I can survive some hate on the internet from people that don't even know me. I can survive, people being mad at me because I said something that maybe was a little taboo, or I said something that, they didn't think I should have been talking about. Like, there's nothing that anyone can do to me that I think that is worse than what I've already been through.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I want to quickly talk about the dating thing because there's a lot of angles of that I think a lot of my greatest wounds have come from being too much for men and that intimidating thing. And there was one relationship that I was in that I wouldn't even have called a bad relationship, where he picked a fight with me, and it was like a moral issue that we had gone to an event and I was introducing myself to people and just being myself and talking to the person who ran the event and whatever. And I wasn't babysitting him, paying attention to where he was in the room. I was like, he's doing his thing. I was just being myself. And afterwards, he was angry that I had not promoted him and introduced him to people and that I was outshining him. And I took that to heart for a moment. You know what I mean? I was angry about it, and I was like, this is bananas. But at the same time, he and I were both taught really similar things about you shouldn't outshine men, you shouldn't take up more space than them, you shouldn't. And I think that's something that made your husband really angry, was that you were more than he was in ways, or that you were speaking in ways that undermined what he might have brought to the table. And I think it's hard now to date because we have all of those confusing things that we talked about of what is a man supposed to even do in the dating field. And also I have had messages time and again, both what I was taught and then reinforced by men who left me or used me or didn't, ultimately were like, I don't have feelings for you because I'm too masculine or strong or take up too much space, too dominant of a person. And I think it's really hard because I am with somebody now that is the opposite of that, and it's been really life-changing, but I still have to live with the fact that I have internalized feelings of throughout the world, just always making sure that not all of me comes out. And I mean, do you struggle with that in dating? I think you do, from what I know. There's this feeling of if they always have to be on top, then I have to make sure that I figure out what the ceiling is and don't go above it. Right? And I think that you and I are both fed up with doing that now. So you'll just tell someone to go away. But at the same time, I mean, there's a reality that a lot of women that I know, men are feeling small these days. They don't feel whatever, and they're still trying to be on top. And a lot of women I know, the strongest women that I know, are in non-traditional kind of situations or are single. I mean, all of my really close, powerful female friends are single. So I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
I feel like in dating, I sometimes have to remind myself, like, I will never be too much for the right person. It's never going to be too much, and what I just constantly remind myself, like, whatever the universe has for me, nobody's going to be able to take it away. So I think that has kind of helped me because, there have been a lot of situations where I've went on dates and I'm also a very tall woman. Men are intimidated by my height. They're intimidated by how loud I am. They're intimidated by how easily I make friends. Almost everywhere I go, somebody's going to know me and be like, oh my God. And I've seen men just be uncomfortable with, like, how do you know, like, why do you know everyone? Like, and I've seen, again, where you walk in room, and when you have like this really radiant energy, people just kind of gravitate towards it, and you tend to become, like, I don't want to say the center of attention, but I've noticed in a lot of rooms that I've been in, like, everybody wants to hear me speak and they want to hear my opinions and my stories and things. And a lot of men cannot handle that. Like, they cannot handle their woman being the center of attention, and they can't handle just kind of like falling to the wayside and letting her shine and letting her have her moment. And so I do think it takes a really, like, it takes a man to be able to be with that type of woman. And I think the problem is that a lot of these men are not men. They're not even mature enough to be men. And so they just act like boys. And I honestly have had to remind myself, like, if someone is really that intimidated by you, that actually says more about them than it does about you. And so, I'm not gonna lie, there have been a lot of times that I'm like, maybe I need to tone it down a little bit for this person, or maybe it's not often that I feel that I can be around people and be my true, authentic self. And so when I am in the space of people like that, where I can just be who I am and say what I want to say, and, nobody bats an eye, like, those are very special people. And I just feel like there's not, like, in dating, and I think that's why a lot of my friends are single, my powerful, opinionated friends are single, is because a lot of men just, they can't handle it. And I think it's just fragile masculinity, to be honest. And it's ego. It's a lot of ego. And I've had to remind myself of that in dating too. Like, when I take my ego out of it, I'm like, were you really that bummed about this person not being interested in you? I'm like, no, your ego was bruised. You had a vulnerability hangover because you were a little bit vulnerable with this person and shared some things that you might not have ordinarily shared. And now you are feeling sad about it. But it's not because you actually liked that person. It's because your ego's bruised. And I think in a lot of dating situations, when men get their ego bruised, it's a lot, like, women tend to bounce back faster. Like, we tend to just get over it. Whereas men, like, I've seen a lot of men just become, like, harder and tougher. And they're like, well, I'm not paying for dates anymore. I'm not, if I'm going out on dates, then the woman can pay for a date. I've seen men, actually, a friend of mine sent me a screenshot of a text this week where she went on a date with a guy. They had a nice date, but she just wasn't into him. And so she let him know, like, hey, I'm just not really feeling it. And he literally asked her if she could Venmo him back for their dinner. And again, it's like fragile masculinity. I'm just like, why? But so, yeah, I think that's a lot of the reason that a lot of women don't date or don't want to date, is because it's just so exhausting. I'm like, I shouldn't have to feed your ego for you to continue to want to go out with me, but I do think it takes a special type of person to be with a strong, powerful woman and not be intimidated by that, and let her have her opinions and her thoughts. And, a lot of men just can't really seem to handle that. And I don't know why that is.
I think that both women and men were handed this little handbook early on with the very specific rules of engagement for how you date, and they were sexist by nature. So women were to be won over and treated like children and given all these things and then owned, and all of those underlying historical things that kind of made their way into the micro engagements that we have. But women are trying to change the rule book. And the fact of the matter is, when you see people in equality, there is no rule book. You put it down and you're like, these are silly. This is what you do when you don't know what to do with your hands. This is what you do when you don't see somebody as just another person across from you that has their own will and needs and ways and expectations, and you figure that out together. And so I think what we're finding is that I think sometimes women will try to correct the situation by changing the rule book. And then everybody has a different way they've done that. And then they're like, well, you have to do these things and these things now to prove this. And you also have to do blah, 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 instead of throwing away the rule book and be like, you and I are sitting across from each other. How do we do life together? How do we engage? And likewise, like it takes a unique of both women and men. It takes a very empowered, healed woman to throw away the rule book, and it takes a very mature man to throw away the rule book. And you just are, I think what we're seeing in the world today is there's not that many good people. There's not that many people that treat others as equals or are fine with a power exchange. There's not that many people who are like willing to show up. But when you do find somebody who doesn't need, it's kind of like if you had a racial difference and it was like, you were like, I think I say these specific things to this person because this is what you do as someone who's other than you. You know, it's like, it's really weird. And that doesn't, that you're not, you know, you have to address the elephants in the room of the history that is behind you and the present that is alongside you, where you still have inequalities. But I think the best men to be mates with are the ones that have come out, that have done some of their own emotional development, first of all, but are come out on the other side where they really just see you as an equal. And you can see that early on. But when people are fixated on, am I supposed to pay? Are you supposed to pay? Are you blah, 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 blah? They're fixated on something artificial that really just identifies that we don't really see each other. And it's hard because there's fewer people. It was easier for people to pair up when everybody was just working off of the rule book. And now you actually see people for who they really are.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think a lot of dating is like, it's so surface level, and that is so boring to me. Like, I want to talk about how you feel about the death penalty. I want to talk about politics. Like, I don't like, because, you know, in the long run, I'm looking for like a partner, right? And I don't want a partner whose favorite color is purple. Like, that doesn't matter to me. And I feel like that's really hard too, because, you know, people aren't ready for those conversations. Like, they don't want to have the deep conversations, and they're uncomfortable conversations. But if you want to have a relationship with anyone, you have to have uncomfortable conversations and you have to have deep conversations. And honestly, I feel like my best friends in the whole entire world were the people like you that we just dove right into it. Like, hey, by the way, I have lots of trauma. Let's overthink, you know, versus like just this surface level stuff. But I also think when you're willing to be vulnerable and you put your most authentic, genuine self forward, people see that. And just like you said, we are dealing with, there's just not a lot of good people out there. There's a lot of people that have a lot of darkness in. And I have often said, you know, in situations in the past where maybe I didn't get along with someone or there was just something off a little bit, I feel like the light in me disrupts the darkness in them. And that makes it very for some people to relate to me. But I just feel like when you're genuine and authentic and you're vulnerable with people, those relationships are much different than, you know, what's your favorite color and, you know, what's your favorite restaurant? Like, and people just don't want to get into that. Like, so it's like, what are we really doing here? Like, we're sitting across from each other, like you said, trying to play by the rules and ask each other like just such surface level stuff that in the end, like, that doesn't really matter. Like, I care about your character and who you are at your core, not, you know, what your first car was when you turned 16. Like, it's just so, I hate the surface level stuff of dating. And there is, I mean, you do have to do some of it too. Like, obviously you're not just, but I think that's part of it, is people aren't ready to have those conversations.
Well, I am so glad that you have your light. It has lit up my life, and I know that it will continue to attract the right people in the right places and the right things. And I am like so proud to be your friend and to see you continually to be more and more in your power and in a mature power,
Thank
you know.
Yeah,
So
thank you. That was,
thank
it does
you.
feel really good to be able to have a voice and to be able to just speak up about things. I just have always kind of felt, you know, even back to a memory that I have from 5th grade, I had finally gotten to sit with the popular kids, and that was like a big deal, you know, like I was invited to sit at the popular table. And there was, I think about this often, there was a kid named Greg Dupree, and I'm like, I wonder where he is today. But he sat at the table behind us, and people would throw food at him and make fun of him, and he always sat by himself. And one day I just got up and sat with him. And that was the end of me sitting at the popular table, because I was no longer popular. They were like, why is she sitting with that weird kid? And as the weeks went on, people started gravitating towards the table, and pretty soon Greg Dupree's table was full. And I know that that was directly because of me. And that was in the 5th grade. So I remember like just these early memories of always being the person who sticks up for what is right, and always being the person that is a friend to others. And, you know, just the underdog, you know, the people I'm like, oh, nobody else likes you. Okay, I'll be your friend. And so I've always kind of been that person, but it feels good to feel like, you know, you have people behind you that are like, yeah, no, you're on the right track. Like, you're speaking up about the right things. Like, this is important. And to feel empowered to speak up about those things, versus like, no, let's just be a good little girl and sit down and, you know, keep our mouth shut and not say anything so we don't lose our job, you know? Excuse me.
Well, I think that's a perfect thing to end on. Thank you so much, Nicole, for being on the show and sharing your light
Yeah,
with
thank
us.
you.